Hello, everyone. Welcome to the next episode of Language Talks. We are talking today to Dr. Shivani Dev. She is a conference interpreter and translator in French, Hindi, and English. She has a PhD in French translation. Currently, she is working as a lecturer of English in the Department of Legal Languages at the Faculty of Law and Political Science, University of Montpellier, in the Occitanie region of France. Let us talk to her and learn about her journey. Hi, Shivani.
Hello, Lalita.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome. Shivani, I would like to start by asking you about your love for French. How did it all begin?
Okay, so I started learning French back in 2004 when I was a school student and I used to live in a small town somewhere in Haryana in India. And it was for the first time that French language was introduced in that small town, and all the students were very eager to learn a new language because before this, our language learning was restricted to English, Hindi, and Sanskrit. So I was very eager to learn French as a new language. And for 4 years at the school level, I learned the basics of grammar and sentence formation and how to write letters in French. Basically, the A1 level of French that we call. And after that, I started with my undergraduate course in Delhi University. And at the same time, I enrolled in a diploma at Alliance Française de Delhi. And
I
that is
see.
where it really got a boost. I was exposed to French culture and I used to listen to French songs, watch French films, and that was really a cultural immersion for me. So, for another 3 years, I studied at Alliance Française de Delhi. And then I got interested even more in the language. So I did a course in masters in French translation and interpretation from Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi again. And then further to that, I did another degree of Master of Philosophy in French translation. And then I finally topped it up with a PhD in French translation. And that is how
Fantastic.
my language learning journey was. Thank
Wow,
you.
this is amazing. Shivani, please tell us about your translation and subtitling assignment from Hindi to French for the film Bhagwati. That must be really interesting.
Okay, so this was also a first experience for me. I was a student back then, and I was in my master's program in 2014 when one of our professors contacted all the students saying that there is a French filmmaker who is in town and who is looking for a translator come subtitler for his upcoming film. So this film was basically sponsored and organized by CNC in Paris, Centre National de Cinématographie. And this French filmmaker was looking for a very rare combination. He wanted someone who could translate Hindi to French. And generally, for translations and subtitling assignments, generally this language pair is not requested for. It's mainly either Hindi to English or English to French that we
Right.
subtitle for. So this
Mhm.
was these were culturally two different languages, Hindi spoken in India and French mainly spoken in France and other francophone countries. So this was a big challenge. And I encountered another big challenge when I got to know that this was not the Hindi that is spoken in Delhi or in big cities. This was
Oh, is it?
yes,
Uh,
this was a regional language, a dialect that is spoken in Firozabad in Uttar Pradesh. So this filmmaker was looking for a specific translation from a regional dialect of Hindi into French. And interestingly, I come from Uttar Pradesh from the same region, so I could understand that dialect and I could successfully translate that. So it was a three-step process. And generally, for translations and subtitling assignments, generally this language pair is not requested for. I had to listen to the dialogues and
Okay.
transcribe them in Hindi. So once I had the written version of all the dialogues, once I had the transcription, I had to translate all of that in French. That was the second step. And the third and the final step was to use a software called Final Cut Pro that is used for professional subtitling to time code all the dialogues as subtitles and then to finally put them screen by screen for the film. So this was a huge assignment. And the third and the final that took almost 5 years to finish. And because
Oh my God.
the
Mm.
yes, the actual film length was 1.5 hours, but because the filmmaker was French, he did not understand Hindi at all. So
I
he had
see.
to understand the 10 hours of film recording that he had done. So I had
Mm.
to translate and subtitle the 10 hours of the recording that he had done. And from that, he selected a few sequences of the film and clubbed them together to make
Mm.
a 90-minute film. So
That
this,
must be a huge task.
yes, it was a huge task because certain dialogues were not clearly audible. These are very conversational, these are like real life conversations that are happening. So it was very, very difficult, but it really enriched my experience as a subtitler.
Okay, wow. Shivani, you worked as a simultaneous interpreter for various assignments. Can you explain to us what is simultaneous interpreting?
Okay, so simultaneous interpretation is fairly new, I would
Mhm.
say, to the field of interpretation. It started in 1945 with the Nuremberg trials that happened during the Second
Yes.
World War. And since then, um, language service providers have been using simultaneous interpretation to translate the message simultaneously as and when the speaker is speaking on the podium. So, usually, when I go for these assignments, I am sitting in a soundproof interpretation booth. And when we interpret simultaneously, it is always in pairs, which means I am there and there is also a partner interpreter. And we do interpretation in alternation, meaning that I will interpret for 20 minutes and then the other interpreter will take on and he or she will interpret for another 20 minutes. So this is done in order to make sure that the interpreters do not tire out themselves in that process, because conferences can go on for 4 hours, for 8 hours, and even longer. So, whenever we are given an assignment, we are always given some documents in advance to help us prepare and understand what the conference is really about. And then I prepare myself by looking at videos of that delegate's speech. I can find them on different websites on YouTube, and I try to um, catch the speed at which the person is speaking and their accent, what kind of words do they use, what kind of language and jargon do they use. And then, according to that, I create a glossary. So it is a list of words with, let's say, I'm interpreting from English to French. So I have the English words and then I have the French translation. And I keep this list handy so that whenever I come across a tricky word and I cannot remember, I can look it up using that list. And then the documents come in handy as well. Simultaneous interpretation can go really, really fast because some of the speakers forget that they are being interpreted, so they speak really fast, and that becomes a challenge sometimes, but with experience you try to catch up with their speed. So whenever the speaker starts with the first sentence, I have to start at the same time. So I have to interpret it simultaneously. So whenever he or she starts and ends speaking, my speech also flows at the same time, so that all the people who are sitting in the hall, they can use headsets to listen to the translation simultaneously. And this reduces the time, because as opposed to simultaneous, there is consecutive interpretation which takes double the time, which means once the speaker finishes his speech, then the interpreter starts translating. So that doubles the time of the conference.
This must be a challenging task, I'm sure. So, to
Yes.
achieve this simultaneous or even consecutive interpretation, you must be good at both languages, right?
Yes.
So, how do you train yourself for your language enhancement?
So, the more you engage with the language on a daily basis, the more enriching it becomes. I have been speaking English ever since I started going to school, so I speak English fluently. I also read English literature to keep myself up to date with English vocabulary. And of course, I take help of tools available on the internet. And mainly for interpretation, we either do interpretations for ministries in India or sometimes for United Nations assignments. So I go to UN websites and I look up the speeches of different delegates and what are the topics that they are talking about. So currently, you could say that climate change is one of the hot topics, and so many conferences are centered around it. So
Right.
yes, I keep myself up to date on the technical vocabulary in all the topics that are being discussed across the conferences.
Understood. Mhm. Shivani, how was the experience of the interpretation assignment of the speech of the Honourable Prime Minister of India, Mr. Narendra Modi?
Okay, so it was a very enriching experience because our Honorable Prime Minister has an excellent level in Hindi, and uh, I had to interpret his speech from Hindi to English, and the conference went on for around 2 hours. So, Mr. Modi, he spoke for around 40-45 minutes, and I was speaking with another interpreter. We were given some documents. In advance, but sometimes the speakers, they deviate from their speech and they start talking about a few examples here and there. So the his speech was quite challenging because he has a tendency of speaking fast at times. But since I had some experience of interpreting speeches from Hindi to English for some ministers in the past, so I could do that successfully. But yes, it was a challenging yet enriching experience.
You must have felt that it's a great honor, right?
Yes, it was definitely an honor for me to interpret his speech.
That's great. Shivani, you have done consecutive and relay interpretation for the Honorable Agriculture Minister of India, Shri Narendra Singh Tomar. Can you explain to us that experience also, and also what is relay
So,
interpretation?
in 2023, during the G20 meetings, I was um, called to Hyderabad to interpret for the Honorable Agriculture Minister of India, Shri Narendra Singh Tomar. And there was a relay interpretation that happened during one of the sessions because there was the Vietnamese Minister of Agriculture who did not speak English or Hindi. He spoke only Vietnamese language, and he was assisted by another interpreter, and she spoke Vietnamese and English. So the challenge was that the Indian Minister of Agriculture spoke Hindi, whereas the
Okay.
Vietnamese Minister of Agriculture spoke Vietnamese language. So how do we get their message across? So in this situation, there were two interpreters, one from the Vietnamese delegation and one from the Indian delegation. The Vietnamese interpreter translated the message from Vietnamese to English. I listened to her English interpretation and then
Okay.
I translated it from English to Hindi for the Indian minister to understand. So this was a
My God.
two-way interpretation going on, rather three-way interpretation from Vietnamese to English and then from English to Hindi. So this was relay interpretation.
I see. Okay. You accompanied the French artist Francois Daireaux to facilitate the language barrier. So, can you share the experience with us? How was that?
Okay, this was another challenging and a rare experience of my life because for the first time I was assisting a filmmaker not just for subtitling but also for assisting him during the filmmaking. So, when he was filming in Delhi, his film focused on the Yamuna River, its pollution, and the different kind of
Okay.
ecosystems that thrive around it. So, this was an art documentary that he made. This was another big project that took 5 years.
Mhm.
And currently, this film is in the final stages of editing, and soon it will be
I see.
launched in the cinema halls in France. So, I was hired as a translator and interpreter to assist him wherever he went. And this made me go to the various banks of Yamuna River and see for real the situation. And I used to help him talk to the people who live across the banks. And this
Okay.
really gave me a grassroots level scenario of how things are, across the Yamuna River and how do people live, what kind of livelihoods do they have, how do they overcome their day-to-day challenges. And I got so involved in the filmmaking process that I ended up talking to the main character of the film. His name is uh, Augustine, and he is the main character who walks across the banks of Yamuna River, and in that process,
Oh,
he encounters people living over there, and he talks to them about their lives. So it's a very interesting film that brings out, a different aspect of, how life can be around a river, on the banks of a river.
okay. Wow. This must have been really enriching for you because you got to see a different aspect altogether of the
Yes,
river. I
yes,
mean,
yes,
wow.
definitely.
You have done simultaneous interpretation for a cryptocurrency conference in Dubai. And you said
Yes,
that was an online interpretation, right? So
yes.
I think another challenge for you, was it?
Yes, yes, it was challenging because as an interpreter, I have mainly dealt with somewhat global topics. We talk about climate change, we talk about environmental degradation, we talk about politics, things like that. We talk about agriculture, about development. So these are the basic things that I was trained about as a student of interpretation, and then eventually in real life, uh, for my career, I took up simultaneous interpretation in these areas. But this was another task where I got to learn about cryptocurrency and how do you deal in Bitcoin, how do you invest in Bitcoin, what are the advantages and disadvantages. So this was a conference that was happening in Dubai, but
Mhm.
uh, I was employed as an interpreter for remote simultaneous interpretation. So there were people who needed interpretation from English to French, the language combination. And I got to learn a lot about cryptocurrency during that 2 day conference. So, as an interpreter, you get to learn on the go. You get to learn every day. So it's quite interesting and enriching.
I'm sure. Shivani, you're handling so many subjects, like you talked about climate, cryptocurrency. So, how do you train yourself or teach yourself all these domains or subject areas?
So generally, whenever there is a conference, a week in advance, we are given a few documents to prepare with, and that gives us a general idea of what the conference is going to be about. Then I go on the internet and I read up articles, latest articles in these, which deal with these topics. For example, uh, there was a conference by the UN which was on climate change. So I had to go and read up everything about climate change. You cannot miss a single word, or a single mistake in terminology can, make your interpretation go bad. So you have to
Right.
have 100% idea about the topic that you are dealing with, and that only helps you even more to make sure that you interpret the message correctly. So internet is a good tool, and apart from that, being up to date with, the international events, the world events, the current affairs, that also helps.
So, how do you train yourself or teach yourself all these domains or subject areas?
So generally, whenever there is a
Okay, Shivani, you are teaching English just now in France. So, how is that experience?
So this was something very new, because I am working as a lecturer of English in the Department of Legal Languages in the Faculty of Law and Political Science in University of Montpellier. So knowing French is definitely a prerequisite for this job, because sometimes you are because your students are mainly French, and they are in the process of learning English. So there are certain sentences or words which they do not understand, and sometimes you have to explain this to them in French. But mainly, I talk to them in English, and I was given very different groups. I was given a group in political science, roughly three groups in political science and three groups in law, in public law. So I am not an expert in political science or law. My education has been mainly in French translation and interpretation. So I had to read up about the American law and the British law, and I had to educate myself before teaching my students, because even though I was teaching them English, it had to be in the framework of legal studies. So I could not teach them just, the basics of grammar or how to make sentences. I had to teach them English, but all within the confines of public law of the United States or the
Okay.
United Kingdom. So this
Hmm.
was for the law students, and for the political science students, I took up international events, and they were really interested in the conflict between Israel and Palestine. And coming from India, I introduced them to the conflict between India and Pakistan over Kashmir. So basically, political issues that the students could be interested in. But everything I was teaching them. Right now, it's the vacation period, but for 2 semesters, I was teaching them everything in English. So this
Hmm.
was for the law students, and for the political science students, I took up international events, and they were really interested in the conflict between Israel and Palestine. And coming from
Okay, so this is a very different and very vast subject that you had to dig deep and teach them, right?
yes, yes, definitely.
Okay. My God, Shivani, you have a diverse experience like interpretation, translation, subtitling, and also teaching of the English language with um, exposure to political science. So that was a great discussion with you, and thank you for sharing a lot of things with us. So, do you plan to learn any other language or languages for that matter?
Well, I plan to learn Urdu, and
Mm-hmm.
that is for my next research project. I am planning to write a paper that deals with Hindi, English, French, and Urdu. I
Mm-hmm.
understand Urdu if someone speaks to me in the language, but I do not know how to read or write. So I have to work upon that. And I also plan to learn Spanish sometime in the future because Spanish is very close to French in terms of pronunciation. So I
Okay.
believe it will be easier for me to learn Spanish.
Okay, so Urdu and Spanish are on your mind right now. Right.
Yes.
I wish you all the best for that.
Thank you.
So, what other projects are there on the plate just now?
Well, I will perhaps try and work as an interpreter in India for the coming year. I have a few translation assignments. I have another interpretation assignment again for the Honorable Prime Minister sometime in August. So I have
Great.
to prepare myself for that. And generally, from September onwards, I get busier as more and more interpretation assignments come. The agencies they contact me for assignments.
Okay, great. That was a lovely conversation, Shivani. Thank you so much for joining. You are a busy person, but you still came on my show and talked to me. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It was a pleasure talking to you. Thank you.
Y- You're welcome. Have a good day.
You too.
Thank you, everyone, for joining me in conversation with Shivani. See you in the next episode with a new guest. Till then, have a good day.